Louis Armstrong was buying a cup of coffee when the child collapsed. The little girl, maybe 6 years old, just crumpled to the floor of Union Station in Chicago like a broken doll. Her mother's scream pierced through the din of the crowded terminal, cutting through conversations, train announcements, and the general chaos of the Christmas Eve rush. But what Louis did in the next 4 hours didn't just save that child's life. It shattered the most rigid racial barriers in American transportation and proved that some things are more important than rules, laws, or even survival itself. December 24th, 1958. The worst blizzard in Chicago history was bearing down on the Midwest, and Union Station had become a prison. Thousands of travelers were stranded, trapped by ice, snow, and winds that made travel impossible. The trains weren't running, the airports were closed, the highways were death traps. Christmas Eve had become a nightmare, and everyone was stuck in the same place, whether they liked it or not. But this wasn't just any place. This was 1958 America, where even a natural disaster couldn't erase the invisible lines that divided people. Union Station had separate waiting areas for white and colored passengers, separate lunch counters, separate restrooms. Even facing the same storm, people were required to suffer separately. Louis Armstrong was sitting in the colored section, nursing his coffee, and watching the snow pile up against the windows. He was supposed to be in New York by Christmas morning, playing a private party for some wealthy folks on the Upper East Side. Big money. The kind of gig that could pay for his house payment and then some. But Mother Nature had other plans. The colored section was cramped, with maybe 30 uncomfortable chairs, one small lunch counter, and restrooms that hadn't been cleaned in God knows how long. The white section, visible through a glass partition, was spacious and comfortable, with cushioned seats, full restaurant service, and attendants making sure everyone was taken care of. Same storm, same building, different worlds. Louis had learned long ago not to let this kind of thing eat him up inside. He'd focus on his music, his thoughts, anything to keep from dwelling on the unfairness. But today was different. Today, he couldn't ignore what he was seeing because what he was seeing was about to become a matter of life and death. The little girl who collapsed was white. Her name was Sarah Morrison, and she was traveling with her mother Ruth from Detroit to Springfield to spend Christmas with relatives. Sarah had been feeling sick all morning, but her mother thought it was just excitement about Christmas. When the child hit the ground, convulsing, her lips turning blue, everyone in the white section started screaming for help. "Get a doctor! Someone get a doctor!" "Is there a doctor here?" "Oh God, she's not breathing." The station manager, a thin, nervous man named Harold Wickham, came running. He looked at the little girl thrashing on the floor and immediately started barking orders. "Call an ambulance! Get the emergency medical kit!" But the phone lines were down because of the storm. The ambulances couldn't get through the snow. And the emergency medical kit contained nothing more useful than bandages and aspirin. Sarah Morrison was dying, and there was nothing anyone in the white section could do about it. That's when someone remembered. "Wait," said a businessman in an expensive coat. "Isn't there a doctor in the colored section? I thought I heard someone talking about a doctor over there." Wickham looked through the glass partition. He could see Louis Armstrong sitting quietly, but also a few other black passengers, including an elderly man who was indeed a doctor. Dr. James Fletcher was a retired physician from Detroit, a man who had spent 40 years delivering babies and treating sick children. He was exactly what Sarah Morrison needed. But there was a problem. The rules were clear. White and colored passengers were not allowed to mix, even in an emergency, even to save a life. Dr. Fletcher could see what was happening through the glass, could see the child convulsing, could see that she needed immediate medical attention. But he couldn't cross that invisible line without permission from station management, and Harold Wickham was torn between his duty to save a life and his duty to follow the laws of segregated America. "Sir," Wickham said, approaching Dr. Fletcher at the glass partition, "we have a medical emergency. Are you a doctor?" "Yes, I am," Dr. Fletcher replied, standing up. "That child is having a seizure. She needs help immediately." I... I'm not sure if you're allowed to... Dr. Fletcher stared at him in disbelief. "Are you serious? You're going to let a child die because of where I'm sitting?" Wickham was sweating despite the cold. He was caught between two impossible choices. Let the child die and live with that on his conscience, or break the segregation rules and risk his job, prosecution, and possibly violence from angry white passengers. That's when Louis Armstrong stood up. "Excuse me," Louis said, his voice carrying that unmistakable warmth even in crisis. "But I don't think we got time for all this foolishness." Louis walked to the glass partition and looked directly at Sarah Morrison, still convulsing on the floor while her mother held her, sobbing. Then he looked at Dr. Fletcher. Then he looked at Wickham. "Cat," Louis said to the station manager, "you got two choices. You can let that little girl die while you worry about your rules, or you can let the doctor do his job. What's it going to be?" "Mr. Armstrong," Wickham stammered, recognizing the famous musician, "you don't understand. There are laws. If I let him into the white section, I could lose my job. I could be arrested." Louis nodded slowly. "You could. Or you could be the man who saved a child's life on Christmas Eve. Which story you want your grandchildren to hear?" Dr. Fletcher was already moving toward the partition door. "I'm going to help that child with or without permission, and if anyone wants to arrest me for practicing medicine, they can do it after she's stable." But before Dr. Fletcher could take another step, something unexpected happened. Harold Wickham made the hardest decision of his life. "Go," he said, unlocking the door between the sections. "Go help her." Dr. Fletcher rushed to Sarah's side. Kneeling on the cold marble floor, he immediately began examining her, checking her pulse, looking at her eyes, assessing her breathing. "She's having a febrile seizure," he announced to the crowd. "Her fever is too high. We need to cool her down immediately. Get me some cold water, ice if you have any, and blankets." The white passengers, moments earlier worried about integration, now rushed to help. They brought water, ice from the lunch counter, blankets from the gift shop. They formed a circle around Dr. Fletcher and Sarah, protecting them, helping them. And Louis Armstrong? He did what he always did in a crisis. He made music. But not the kind of music you might expect, not upbeat jazz or cheerful songs. Louis began to hum, very quietly, a gentle lullaby. It was something his grandmother had sung to him when he was sick as a child, a wordless melody that somehow conveyed safety, comfort, and hope. Sarah's mother, Ruth, looked up through her tears and saw this famous black musician humming a lullaby for her white daughter. And in that moment, something inside her broke open. All the fear, all the prejudice, all the hatred that she'd been taught since childhood crumbled under the weight of pure human kindness. "Thank you," she whispered to Louis. "Please don't stop." So Louis kept humming, and Dr. Fletcher kept working. And slowly, miraculously, Sarah's convulsions began to ease. Her breathing became more regular. Her color started to return, but they weren't out of danger yet. Dr. Fletcher explained that Sarah had a serious infection that required antibiotics. Without proper medication, the seizures could return, and next time, they might be fatal. "The hospital is 20 miles away," Dr. Fletcher said. "Even if we could get through the snow, she might not survive the trip in this condition." That's when Louis had an idea, and crazy, impossible idea that might just work. What if we brought the hospital to her? Everyone stared at him. "What do you mean?" Ruth asked. Louis smiled, and for the first time since the crisis began, that famous twinkle returned to his eyes. "I mean, we got thousands of people trapped in this station. Some of them got to be doctors, nurses, maybe even folks who work for pharmaceutical companies. We just got to find them." It seemed impossible. How do you locate medical professionals among thousands of stranded passengers? How do you find medication in a train station during a blizzard? Louis Armstrong had an answer for that, too. He walked over to the main information desk, picked up the public address microphone, and cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Louis Armstrong speaking. A hush fell over the entire station. Everyone knew that voice. We got a little girl here who's real sick, and she needs our help. We got a doctor taking care of her, but we need more medical folks and some specific medications. If you're a doctor, a nurse, or if you work in medicine, please come to the main waiting area. If you got any antibiotics with you, any medical supplies, anything that might help a sick child, please bring them down here. This little girl's life depends on all of us working together. Then Louis did something that broke every rule in the segregated South. And I don't care what color you are, what religion you practice, or where you come from. Right now, we're all just human beings, and human beings help each other. That's what Christmas is about. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, people began to move. A white doctor from the first-class section came forward. A black nurse from the colored section joined them. A Hispanic pharmacist who had been stranded with his family offered medical supplies from his sample case. Within 30 minutes, Sarah Morrison had an entire medical team working to save her life. Doctors consulted together across racial lines. Nurses from different backgrounds worked side by side. Passengers shared medications, supplies, and expertise without regard to segregation laws. But most importantly, they did it all under the protection of Louis Armstrong's presence. His fame, his beloved status with both white and black Americans, gave everyone permission to ignore the rules for a higher purpose. Harold Wickham watched all this happen with growing amazement. The segregation barriers in his station had completely dissolved. White and colored passengers were talking, sharing food, comforting each other, and nobody was complaining. Nobody was demanding that the rules be enforced. In fact, the opposite was happening. The emergency had revealed something that the segregation laws had tried to hide. These people weren't enemies. They were just people, stuck in the same situation, trying to get through the same storm. As the hours passed and Sarah's condition stabilized, something beautiful began to happen in Union Station. The artificial divisions started to disappear completely. Passengers shared their Christmas food across racial lines. Children played together regardless of color. Families helped other families regardless of background. Louis found himself at the center of it all, not because he was famous, but because he kept making music. He'd moved to the main waiting area where everyone could hear him, and he played quiet, gentle songs that somehow made the whole terrible situation feel more bearable. At one point, a little white boy approached him shyly. "Mr. Armstrong," the boy said, "my daddy says you're the best musician in the world." Louis grinned. "That's real nice of your daddy to say. What's your name, son?" "Tommy. I play piano a little bit. Could you maybe teach me something?" Louis looked around the station at all these people stranded together, waiting together, helping each other. "You know what, Tommy? I think this whole place could use some music lessons." What followed was the most informal, integrated music lesson in American history. Louis taught anyone who wanted to learn: white children, black adults, elderly folks, young parents. He showed them simple rhythms, basic melodies, the fundamentals of jazz. The music brought everyone together in ways that laws never could. By morning, when the blizzard finally broke and the train started running again, Union Station had been transformed. Sarah Morrison was stable and ready to travel to the hospital for further treatment. But more than that, hundreds of people had experienced something they'd never experienced before: true integration, true cooperation, true human brotherhood. Harold Wickham faced a choice as the passengers began to leave. He could report what had happened, acknowledge that he'd allowed segregation rules to be broken, and probably lose his job. Or he could pretend it never happened. Instead, he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He wrote a report to his superiors that read, "During the blizzard emergency of December 24, 1958, Union Station operated under integrated conditions due to medical emergency. This arrangement proved not only successful, but preferable to segregated operations. I recommend permanent integration of all facilities immediately. It was career suicide, and Wickham knew it. But he'd seen something in those 4 hours that he couldn't ignore. He'd seen what America could be if it chose love over fear, cooperation over division. Louis Armstrong was one of the last passengers to leave Union Station. As he gathered his trumpet case and headed for the train that would take him to New York, he'd missed his original Christmas gig, but his agent had found him another one. Harold Wickham approached him. "Mr. Armstrong," Wickham said, "I want to thank you." "For what, Cat?" "For showing me what courage looks like, for helping me do the right thing." Louis smiled and shook the station manager's hand. "You did the right thing all by yourself, Mr. Wickham. You just needed a reason to remember who you really are." The story of Christmas Eve at Union Station spread quickly. Newspapers picked it up. Magazine wrote about it. But the most important coverage came from the medical journals, which documented how an integrated medical response had saved Sarah Morrison's life in a way that segregated medicine never could have. Dr. Fletcher and the white doctors who had worked together published a joint paper about the incident, arguing that segregated health care was not only morally wrong, but medically dangerous. Their paper became a cornerstone of the movement to integrate American hospitals. Sarah Morrison recovered completely and grew up to become a doctor herself, inspired by the night when strangers of all colors worked together to save her life. She spent her career working in integrated medical settings, always saying that her life's mission was to prove that healing knows no color. Harold Wickham did lose his job, as expected, but he found a new one quickly, as an administrator for the NAACP, helping to coordinate transportation for civil rights workers. He spent the rest of his career fighting against the segregation laws he'd once enforced. And Louis Armstrong? He never talked much about that night publicly. When reporters asked him about it, he'd just smile and say, "Music brings folks together, Cat. Everything else is just noise." But privately, Louis considered that Christmas Eve one of the most important nights of his life. Not because he'd saved a child, though he was proud of that, but because he'd seen proof that his lifelong belief was correct. When you strip away all the artificial divisions, all the rules and laws and prejudices, people are just people, and people at their core want to help each other. Years later, when the Civil Rights Act was passed and segregation became illegal, Louis received a letter from an unexpected source. It was from Sarah Morrison, now Dr. Sarah Morrison, writing on her graduation from medical school. "Dear Mr. Armstrong, you probably don't remember me, but I'm the little girl whose life you helped save at Union Station on Christmas Eve 1958. I wanted you to know that I became a doctor because of that night. Not because of what happened to me, but because of what I saw happen around me. I saw people choose love over fear, cooperation over division, healing over hatred. That's what medicine should be. That's what America should be. Thank you for showing us the way." That letter joined Louis's most precious possessions, a reminder that sometimes the most important performance isn't the one on stage, but the one in real life, when ordinary people are called to do extraordinary things. The Christmas Eve miracle, as it came to be known, proved something that Louis Armstrong had always believed. Music isn't just entertainment. It's a force for unity, a bridge between souls, a reminder of our shared humanity. And on that snowy night in Chicago, when a little girl's life hung in the balance and the barriers between people seemed insurmountable, Louis Armstrong used his voice not just to sing, but to call America to its better angels. In the end, that's what made Louis Armstrong truly great. Not just his trumpet, not just his voice, but his unwavering belief that it really was a wonderful world, not because it was perfect, but because it was full of people capable of choosing love when it mattered most.